Let me pick up on another thing you raised about the challenge of finding common ground these days. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how we can best think about the approach of our education system, not simply in preparing students to either go on to higher education or enter the workforce, but to be citizens. How do you think about that part of the challenge? Because it seems like, as you've alluded to, it's harder and harder these days to just practice sort of basic communication, good citizenry, listening to each other in a way that our states and countries need to prosper. How do you think about that sort of citizenship aspect in the education system?
First of all, it's an and, not an or, because you actually need the same skills, reading and comprehension. In the first few years of school, you learn to read, and then after third grade, you read to learn. And that, so you need to have those basic skills in place for civics education, for conflict resolution, for all of those things. So it is consistent with the academic goals of the K through 12 system. But above and beyond the academic goals, how do you deploy them? How do we include meaningful character education, conflict resolution, civic education? We signed a bill around being able to understand media, and then after third grade, savvy, for example, and understanding, false from true. So these are things that not all kids get at home. In fact, there might be kids that grow up in an environment at home where their parents are subject to some of those falsehoods and misinformation. How do we give them the critical thinking skills to be able to tell fact from fiction, form your own opinions? It's not about opinions. It's about fact and falsehoods. And that is absolutely an important role of schools, but it's entirely consistent with the academic mission.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. You just heard from Colorado Governor Jared Polis from our Reagan Institute Summit on Education, or what we'd like to call RISE 2021. He said that teaching civics is entirely consistent with the academic mission of schools. And today, we get to see that the state of Colorado is all in on civics. My name is Janet Tran, and I serve as the director of the Center for Civics, Education, and Opportunity, or CCO, here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. The CCO works at the nexus of civics and education policy, answering President Reagan's call for an informed patriotism to ensure a more prosperous future for America. And today, as it's always been, the challenges to America and our institutions require an educated citizenry and a multifaceted approach. As such, the CCO looks to create a collective impact on American society through partnerships that help support those three levers of change. Together, the CCO will look to these levers to better prepare America to answer the challenges of the 22nd century, to renew the American spirit and sense of purpose. So today, I'm really proud to continue the Reagan Institute State of Civics series. The original civic mission of schools has long ago receded, and it's in greater danger than ever of being further sidelined in a time when many of us feel it's most imperative. At the Reagan Institute, we believe that the greatest innovation in civics and at education in general, they happen at the state level. So through the State of Civics series, the Reagan Institute will highlight the work of states that explore exemplary civic learning and civic engagement achievements through the voices of our state chiefs, National Teachers of the Year, and great educators and other leaders in the field, and of course, our students. These programs will give a general overview of what is happening around the country, and we'll zero in on a case study of the highlighted state, then look at what is on the horizon. And today, we are pleased to feature an exemplary state in civic education, Colorado. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner of Education for Colorado, Dr. Katy Anthes. Welcome.
Thank you, Janet. I'm really happy to be here today.
We are thrilled to have you. Additionally, we are joined by Kathleen Weil, elementary technology instructor at Peak to Peak Charter School. Hello, Kathy.
Thanks for inviting me to the conversation. Very excited to be here today.
Wonderful. And next, I'm pleased to introduce Yusara Ali, an exceptional student leader at the University of Colorado, Denver, and a global-minded leader.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
It is our privilege. And finally, please welcome Ace Parsi, Senior Director of Outreach and Partnerships for Educating for American Democracy, to our virtual stage.
Great to join you, Janet.
Well, the Reagan Institute is thrilled to have every single one of you here today. And we'll start with Ace to have a more macro picture here. You've worked with a ton of diverse partners across the country who have collaborated or are in support of Educating for American Democracy. So around the country, there's a groundswell and a focus on civics at both the federal and state level. To start us off, would you mind giving us maybe some status of the bills that are on the floor in both the U.S. Capitol and the state houses around the country? Maybe share with us what's happening in the civic engagement field around the nation and in Colorado from your vantage point.
Sure. I mean, I think I'll defer to the Coloradans to talk about Colorado, but I can definitely give some perspective in terms of what's happening nationally. I think that everybody across the political aisle sees the imperative and the consequences of not teaching civics education. Thanksgiving's coming up. That's going to be a very clear manifestation of that for many of us. But really, we see it in our communities, our neighborhoods, our states, and our country more broadly in terms of the toxicity of discourse and how people are engaging and how people feel about their neighbors and how they feel about their own empowerment in their community. So I think that the main thing to highlight is that this has been a systemic problem that's been decades in the making. So the statistic that we cite often is that for every $50 that this nation spends in STEM education, we spend about 5 cents in civic. And nobody, I think, here would say that we should cut STEM funding. Absolutely not. But it does highlight that we sow what we reap, or reap what we sow. And so I think that reality is that there's a legislation right now, the Civic Secures Democracy Act, that's out there that is going to give resources. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation supported by Senator Cornyn of Texas and Senator Chris Coons of Delaware on the Senate side. And it would help write that. It would give $1 billion on civics education. So that would be one thing. Now, states have been approaching this in very proactive session in terms of policy more broadly. So you'll see things, everything related to state standards, to pilot programs and assessments. And we're seeing that really happening. I think that some of the challenging realities that we're experiencing in states is that for better or worse, civics has been really in the spotlight, and not really for the sometimes the best reasons, because there is misinformation on some of what teachers are doing in classrooms, and there's a trust issue that I think has to be addressed. But underlying that, there are many states that are taking proactive stances to limit the capacity of educators to teach. And we find that really problematic. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that throughout the panel.
Thanks, Ace. It's a challenging time, emerging from the pandemic, and there's a lot of reasons for us to be more isolated than we are before. So I'm really excited to focus on the state we're highlighting today, the Centennial State of Colorado. Commissioner Anthes, you've had a distinguished career at the Colorado Department of Education, both as a leader and a researcher. And amidst all of the incredible competing needs, this has been the most challenging year in our recent history. How is the state working to ensure students have these opportunities to learn and actually experience civics in Colorado schools? And what are you and your office doing to ensure that students have these opportunities to be engaged and active citizens?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more with Ace in that, this is actually, and you, Janet, that this is a really important topic right now. And I think our teachers, and, we'll hear from Kathleen soon, but I think our teachers feel it probably even more so than we do, because they're on the ground level. They're responding to, parent concerns. They're responding to information and sometimes misinformation, and they're needing to navigate that on a regular basis. But Colorado has always had a real focus on civics education, and we actually had several laws that came into being in the last couple of years. But we are a local control state, which means that we do not, and I see Ace laughing because every state says that, but I would say Colorado is on one end of the spectrum. We are constitutionally not allowed to prescribe curriculum. So what we do is, we have state standards, and that really serves as our roadmap for our students and our teachers. And then teachers have flexibilities within that roadmap, but still making sure that our students, know and are able to do certain facts and pieces. I will say that Colorado, the only state requirement we have, we only have one specific graduation requirement, is civics, is a civics class. So students must take a civics class to graduate from any school in Colorado. Now, we also, are seeing the world change around us, and the importance of understanding our history and really, understanding the facts behind our history. And we've had several laws come into being to make sure we review our standards and ensure that they incorporate teaching issues related to American minorities, teaching history, culture, social contributions of American Indians, Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, as well as the lesbian, gay, bisexual individuals within our country, that we really want to have an inclusive and full perspective of our history. And so we are working on reviewing our social studies standards right now. We have a committee of educators who are reviewing that and making recommendations to our State Board of Education for inclusion. We're also making sure that Holocaust and genocide studies are included in that, because unfortunately we have not seen those things go away in our world. And so we need to be sure that we are teaching those materials. And then lastly, we had a new law put in place around media literacy and around understanding, in our world where there's so much information, how do we separate, as our governor mentioned in the clip, how do we separate fact from fiction? How do we separate perspectives, opinion, facts, history? How do we understand those different pieces and be critical thinkers about that? And so that is incorporated, or will be incorporated, into our standards as well.
Well, I see Kathy smiling because, as a technology instructor, you work with some of our younger students on digital citizenship, which to the skeptics out there, if you wouldn't mind, what is the right age to begin teaching civics, and what does that look like?
Sure. So I don't honestly think it's ever too young to start discussing civics. You can talk about the concept of being a member of a community at a very young age. And that concept runs through our entire civics curriculum. We start at just what is a community, identifying types of community. And by the time they get to graduation, we're talking about preparing to vote and be that active member in the community, even though there's many other things they can do in between. But I think we can start with our youngest students and talking about what are examples of communities, whether it's a family unit, school, our city, state. But more importantly, we talk about being members in the community in a way that's helpful and productive. With our youngest students, actually with all of our students, we discuss the importance of being respectful to others in our community. We talk about the importance of being inclusive and inviting all to engage in these community activities. We also look for opportunities to help each other in our community. This week, our students are engaged in a Canned Good drive to help, with the local food banks. Last week, we all dressed in orange as a sign of unity. We've been talking about kindness all month because that's our character trait that we're focused on. And all of that can tie back into the civics curriculum and that simple concept of being a positive and productive member and helpful member in your community. As our country has gotten more and more divisive on so many different issues, I think it's important that we start at a very young age and instill that concept of being a respectful respectful and responsible member in your community. I mean, if we look at the Cub Scouts and the brownies, I was a brownie scout. At kindergarten, I was, doing things to help out my community. I had the opportunity to go to girls' state in high school. I was involved with a service sorority in college, but I think it was because of those early conversations about being a member of a community, empowering myself as a young age, and now my students at a young age to get engaged and be active in the community. My students, I was just asking them today, and they're like, oh yeah, I could pick up trash, and they could do other things that just to help out in their community. And then one student said, Miss Weil, I have this really interesting statistic. And I don't know if the first number is right, but I know the second number is absolutely correct. And he said that I heard the statistic was that 20% of the world population is kids, but it's 100% our future. And I was like, whoa. And so I said, so what are you going to do? He goes, no offense to the adults right now, but we got a lot of work to do. And I found all of that really profound. But again, it's because we're having these conversations at the most, earliest levels we can about being that member in a community and empowering our students to find ways to be civically engaged. So to answer your question, I don't think it's ever too young to start talking about civics and civic responsibilities.
Well, Commissioner Anthes wouldn't have to worry about disinformation if all of our young people and our adults were able to say, I'm not sure if that statistic is correct or that fact is correct. So that's amazing. Well, let's take a moment and fast forward, though, from elementary school, maybe past middle school through high school to college. Sarah, you join us as a student at the University of Colorado, Denver, and as a civic leader with a ton of exceptional experiences. And as educators, we want to make sure that all of our students have the opportunities to develop their leadership muscles. Do you mind sharing with us a bit about your journey, perhaps starting with your local community? What have you worked on in the past? And, how did you become interested in being engaged? What sparked this?
I definitely say my teachers sparked my interest in civics, and specifically my social studies teachers. I come from a small community in Denver called Montbello, and we experience the worst, like teacher turnover, funding, have a lot of different issues that our students face. And even though our teachers aren't, treated the best or funded the best or given the materials they need to teach the best, I've noticed that my teachers, they went above and beyond with providing me information about my rights and about our students' rights. My school, we had this phrase. It's called activists, innovators, and artists. And that activist part was a really big, important part. I remember I came there when I was in 7th grade. It's a 6th through 12th grade, and there were always protests. I remember students walking out of school, marching downtown, for a cause, because our school's mostly minorities. We had Hispanics and Black students, and a lot of gun violence and issues of police brutality really impacted us, and students here always chose to show up. And I was just inspired by my peers. Peers went to school board meetings to make sure that our school didn't get shut down. Unfortunately, this year it is getting shut down, but we've been fighting that fight for a while. And yeah, my school overall has inspired me, even though we're not, the most funded or we don't have the most consistent teachers. Those teachers who were there, they still continue to connect with us, beyond school. And I think that's why teachers should get paid more, because, they do more than they're given. So with that, I was involved in a human rights club, who my social studies teacher, she formed, and we would meet during lunch times because we couldn't meet after school because some of us were like, oh, we have this to do, this to do. So we made a time that all the students could come together, and our big goal was to make our school a human rights school and be certified by Amnesty International. And we didn't get to meet that goal, but we really tried, and we did everything to get students active and to know their rights and to know their place and to vote. And with that, of course, the issues of who gets to educate who, and what is true, what isn't. And we had these debates. Some students I don't understand, why is this important, or why should I care? So with that, entering college, I joined the student government, and with student government, I was able to see all these changes and continue to be inspired. But with that, I also noticed that I didn't know the students at CU Denver. So this year I decided to not be a student government, but work directly with student. I'm a peer advocate leader where I help first year students. And with that, I'm learning what students need, what resources they need that CU might not offer. I think CU is like, well, since I've been here, CU has really shown that they care about student voices and they want to hear from students. So now that I'm no longer, you know, sorry, now that I'm no longer part of the legislation of student government, I am still with the students and I'm understanding the students better. So that way, when I do go back, I have a better understanding of how to aid students. I even work with immigrants outside of school at APDC, and currently I'm working at I'm volunteering to help with humanitarian parole with the whole Afghan situation. And with that, we have attorneys and yeah, a lot of policy and civics is really involved in all the work I'm doing. And I'm just excited, to be here.
I'm inspired by all of the activities and how engaged you are, but I love that you mentioned we didn't succeed in some areas because I would argue that not yet. Maybe it's a long journey, right? The moral arc of the universe. Before we go back to Commissioner Anthes, I wanted to just see Ace real quickly. We've heard a lot about disinformation and, diving into our problems and how do we solve these challenges. I wanted to know if you wanted to maybe elucidate how you're thinking about this with the team at Educating for American Democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a background, the Educating for American Democracy was a cross-disciplinary, cross-ideological initiative that brought together over 300 different scholars, students, educators, and others to think about a roadmap. And that's really important, I think, to what the commissioner is saying, because that will look very different in Denver than it will in a different part of Colorado or Maine or other places. But that is a clear conversation that we need to be engaging with. And what strikes me is that given how polarized civics has become, we sometimes try to skirt the issues, sort of like you do with your really annoying relative at the Thanksgiving table. But that's not where real civics lies. The great civics lies within the tension. So, I'm an immigrant from Iran. I fled Iran to my family to come to a democracy, and democracies involve people who disagree coming together and having hard conversations, and that is how we preserve democracy. So those tensions of how do we have a plural story of America and still have a shared story? How do we both celebrate and critique the limitations of compromise throughout our history? How do we tell the challenging realities in our past without being cynical and tell some of the great things that brought families like mine here without tipping into adulation? Those are things when you look at the Educating for American Democracy roadmap, which you can find at educatingforamericandemocracy.org. You'll find that those aren't bugs of how we're defining great civics and history education. They're actually the very features of that. Kathleen, I think in terms of what you're describing, I have a 6-year-old right now who's a first grader. And I do think some of these themes, some of these tensions, my 6-year-old educates me about these things all the time. And so I think it's a really important what you're doing to make sure that we build that foundation from the earliest ways. And that's what another feature of this roadmap, because we don't thrust any student into advanced chemistry or algebra without any scientific foundation or mathematical foundation. We don't get them into really advanced literature without providing the very scaffolding of literacy, but we often do that with civics and history education. So it's important that we commit to that at the youngest ages and then continue that commitment all the way through senior year of high school and beyond.
Yeah, it's a great point, because currently most states that do offer civics, it's a half-year course in the 12th grade, which is might be a little late for us to invest in this, this American experiment that we want to continue. Commissioner Anthes, I want to go back to, you talked about Colorado being a very unique beast, a unique state in light of this local, quote, control of instruction. So, what civic education programs exist for students and teachers across the state? How do you incentivize them to take advantage of it? And of course, the $1 million question is like, how do we ensure that our students have those equitable opportunities and access to those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we do a lot of work at our department with making sure that different resources are available across our state, and then districts get to choose sort of how they use those resources. And just like Yusura said, she comes from a community that's very activist, and they wanted to use the amnesty work as their sort of framework for getting involved and learning, and we think that's wonderful. And there are a lot of other opportunities too. So we do use the Colorado Center for Civic Learning and Engagement a lot across the state of Colorado. It aims to ensure that all Colorado educators and students alike have really updated real-time resources that are relevant to what is going on in the world right now, so that they can plug those into their programs. And I will say that we really encourage this interdisciplinary approach, right? Civics should really be involved in everything we do, in everything we're teaching. Even if you're teaching math, you could be using real world examples of things, current events, things that are happening, statistics on how certain things are impacting populations. You can do all of this. So we really should be thinking of civics and character education and all of those things as embedded in every subject matter that we do. We also have a very active We the People program. It focuses on the citizen and the Constitution. And so we, really for the past 10 years, we've been active participants in that. We have 6,000 students that participate.
And your state does quite well.
Yeah. And we represent 12 teams and we compete. And in 3 decades, we have consistently placed in the top 10. And the
humble brag.
6 times. So yes, I'm very proud.
Shout out to our friends at the Center for Civic Education.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have the Colorado Student Leaders Institute. We actually have a number of student leader organizations that we're really proud of, but it's an affiliate of the National Conference of Governor Schools. And so really trying to reinforce that student leadership that we've heard about today, and really encourage that. And so it's just really important, that we do this. And then also, I've been trying to lead an effort just by example, in terms of, some of the things that we've been seeing in our school board meetings, as Kathleen said, I believe, our adults aren't necessarily modeling. Some adults are, for sure, and we want adults to be involved in the school board process, but we want to do that in a way that does exactly what Ace said, which is tension and debate and dialogue is a part of our democracy. So we don't want to shut that down. We want to encourage that, but we want to encourage it in ways that are respectful, open, listening. I've always hated this idea that if a politician changes their mind, they're wishy-washy. If a politician changes their mind based on information and new learning, we should celebrate that. And I have changed my mind on a number of things as commissioner, and I take pride in that because I listen, I hear things, and I may change my perspective. And I just loved what Ace said. That is the tenet of our democracy, not something that we should, shy away from, but we should do it respectfully and peacefully and without threats. And that's really important to me. So I did an op-ed a couple weeks ago about this, and really want to encourage all of my leaders across the state to take that same modeling perspective.
Yes, it would be a tragedy if we went through our entire lives without changing our minds once. I don't know how people manage that, but they seem to pretend to. Before we move on to Kathy, I do want to follow up a little bit with the Colorado Student Leadership Institute. the testimonials are incredible. And I'm just curious, and I'm sure other state leaders are curious as well when you think about these schools and these opportunities. What do you think makes this experience so impactful? Why are students attributing so much of their success and have like such fond memories of it? And it really stands out as part of their K through 12 experience.
Yeah, well, I really think part of it is the embedded and intense nature of the program. So these students, are learning on at least a 1-month program that takes place at the University of Colorado Denver campus. They really focus on entrepreneurship, engagement, responsibility, integrity, accountability, ethics, and relevance is what keeps our kids and our students involved. And it's just so relevant. You're just seeing what's going on around the world. And folks are hungry for, how do we ethically, talk about these things? How do we think about what Ace said, which is this being able to find the tension between presenting our full story, our historic story, and a shared story. And that balance of saying, yeah, America and our founding did make some mistakes, for sure. And we should acknowledge that and be optimistic that it is also a beacon of freedom, and we will always be perfecting that union. So that relevancy, that is really what that Leadership Institute does. And it says we want the students, just as Kathleen said, 100% of our future is students. So encouraging them to lead the next way. They're so engaged in that. They want to do that, and they're ready. I think Sarah is far ready. I just love what you said about, I want to know my students before I'm on student government. I want to know what they need. I want to listen to them. That's so wise. It's so wise, and we all need to take a note from you.
Well, I'll move to Kathy now because obviously, you have been engaged in this work for quite some time. And I'm curious as to, it's been a really rough time for our frontline teachers. It's been a tough year. And I'm just wondering, what kind of support can the state of Colorado provide you and your fellow teachers in doing this work, whether it is online or in person? And, what has made you a better civics educator?
Sure. So one of the things I really, really love is that the school that I work at, I work with some incredible teachers, and we're really supportive of each other, and we identify needs that we need across the curriculum. Things that are, whether it's civics based or others, I don't know who spoke to it earlier about it should be interdisciplinary connections that we're making. And at my school, we have a really great character development or character education program in place. And like a lot of schools, we might look at a different character trait each month, but we continue to build on previous character traits. We keep the signage up, so it's not just 1 month and then that skill goes away. We continue to build on it as there's more and more skills and how they interact with each other. And one of the things I really love is that as in my position as the technology teacher, I can connect with whatever they're doing in the classroom. And so if they are discussing something in the classroom, then I can talk about it in a digital environment. Or if there's something going on in the classroom, the teachers can say, hey, this is kind of a little grumbling that's going on. And then I can continue to support those students in my classroom as well. A couple of things that I think are really great that are happening here in our school that help us kind of prepare our students for both spaces is that we do start that conversation around community, and then we dig into our own community to see what we can do to put those character traits into play to try and make some sort of action or some sort of change that's important to us in our community. And I love this one activity our second graders do. They actually build, the school's called Peak to Peak, so they build Peakville. And what they do is they start out by talking about all the needs they need in our community: a grocery store, a school, a city dump. Even though it's stinky, it's needed. And so they talk about all these different things that they need in their community. Then they sit down and they decide who's going to build what structure. And they physically build these little buildings. They bring their buildings in, they move all the desks to the edge of the room, and they plan out like little urban planners. They create the city and they talk about traffic plans. Like, okay, we don't want to put this next to the school because it's going to be really busy at the beginning and end of the day. And we probably don't, the stinky dump is a big one. They don't want the dump near the school. So they want it in a safe place so that whatever comes out of the dump doesn't get into our water, probably isn't close to our neighborhoods. But it's really interesting at 7 years old, I'm wondering how many of them are now looking out their car window and saying, oh, look at that. And that's a need in my community. And I just think that at 7 years old, they're putting this on our students' radar and again, getting them civically involved. And I know Dr. Anthes talked about many different programs that we have here in the state. One that I absolutely love is for our fifth graders, or I should say my school, it's fifth grade. It can be for fourth, fifth, or sixth grade, but it's called Young Ameritown. And Young Ameritown, if you talk to our high school students, they'll be like, oh my gosh, that was one of the best days of fifth grade. And I said, well, why? What makes it so special? And what happens with Ameritown is before the actual field trip, they start talking. They have lessons in their classroom where they talk about civic engagement and they talk about different roles in the community that play to making changes in the community. They talk about business, they talk about economics, they talk about free enterprise, and all the different components that go into building a community. Again, going back to the most basic component of civics education, what it means to be a member of a community. And so by the time they get to that field trip, they go to like a mock town and they take on different roles, maybe a bank manager, an accountant, customer service rep. They explore careers like physician, even a graphic designer, and they all run a business. Some even run for mayor or other political offices, but they really get involved in running this city. They also all get a bank account so they can take their earnings and put it in the bank. And then they have to go shopping and they have to first identify needs before wants and look at those types of things. And I just love that these programs, even again at the early age, no politics involved. It's just identifying what it means to be civically engaged. And I really love that I work in a community that is so supportive. And we have these programs like Young Ameritown here in the state that can help support and take that civic engagement outside of our classroom and give them a little more hands-on real world experience.
Yes, I love that when you're working in local community, there really isn't any politics about getting our students better opportunities or making sure our city or our town is clean and functioning correctly and the lights are going on at the right time. So that's a great experience. And oftentimes, when our students see civics for the first time, it's really, really at the national level, and it might be hard to, relate to. I think many people don't really get there until they have experienced voting, and that might be too late to kind of set that spark off. I really want to think about you, Sarah, and school mission statements all over the state will say that part of it is preparing students for civic life. But you mentioned, and we all know that those opportunities, they're not equitably distributed, right? And you've heard a ton of opportunities out there from the commissioner, from Katy. And I'm wondering, what do you think are some experiences that you had, or what are some experiences that every student in Colorado should have that would be very influential in ensuring that they are ready for civic life?
I'm glad that you guys brought up these different programs, because I believe that these programs that I've been part of have played a big role in how civically engaged I am. And I think education and learning goes beyond just the classroom, and these programs showcase that. And there's more diverse topics happening and discussions happening that some students are more comfortable doing outside the classroom compared to inside the classroom, where there might be more structure. And I like how you guys mentioned the creativity that's behind civics and integrating civics into different aspects of life, because that's I don't know, that what keeps me going is the stories. I think sometimes we think of civics and policy and it's just so overwhelming for students and for adults, and it's like this big thing that only certain people have the privilege to do or be part of, which is not true. And I think we could bring creativity into it. I would say I'm more of a creative person, even though I'm going a more sciencey route or a more political policy route with immigration. So I think we should invest more in programs Like I said, the human rights club that I was part of, that was a big part. Even though that was connected to the school, it was still something that was separate from the classroom, that was separate from, everything else that was happening. I also did, I'm a big videographer and video editor, so I did a lot of programs after school where me and my friends would like make videos. And one of those videos that I make a lot starting last year and also some with this year is on getting students to vote. I know like media is such a big part, and I know we're gonna discuss it later if we have time, but these different routes and different avenues just let people know. I think the biggest problem is people don't know. I've noticed that once I entered college, it's all these programs, but most of the people who my graduating class, there were 60 of us total, and most of us did not know where to go or where to start. But there's all these opportunities. It's just finding ways to like educate people about them, and giving students the access to them.
I like that you said, well, I'm doing the science stuff, but I'm still a creative person, because it turns out we are multitudes and you can be all of those things. You don't have to just be a scientist. You can be a creative artist scientist. So, I think we are trying to do a better job of moving away from the false dichotomies, which maybe has contributed to a lot of the polarization that we see right now. This really is a good tie-in in terms of thinking about diverse perspectives. And, Commissioner Anthes, you've been a proponent of being more inclusive, and you talked about that a little bit. I want to know how you were thoughtful, or how you plan to incorporate those voices of different stakeholders in Colorado, from students, parents, and teachers, because it is really challenging today, as people are worried that perhaps, quote, their history is being taken away. And we think of it in terms of uninformed patriotism, as I said here, at the Reagan Foundation and Institute. And, there is a concern that as we are more inclusive, perhaps we are losing something. So how do we incorporate these voices in a manner that doesn't feel like it's a, the zero sum, you win or I win sort of mentality that we've been seeing, not just in your state, but across the country?
Yeah, it really is the $1,000,000 question. And though social media has been helpful in many ways, it can also just make sure you're only hearing your own narratives, and I think we're not actively teaching people to listen. And going back to what Ace said, which is saying it's okay to disagree. That's a part of our experiment.
Dissent, our founding, right?
It's necessary. It's necessary. And we get to better conclusions if we disagree, and if we take those things and come up with a third solution, from different perspectives. So I just, really hope, that's the perspective I take. And as I said, I try to model that. I have to model it every day, because I work for a state board of education that is politically elected, and I have a board that is part Democrat, part Republican. I didn't want to say a split board, because we can actually come to agreement on things. We have to compromise sometimes. We have to hear each other out. Sometimes we're better at it than other times. But I have really said to my state board, and I said this when they hired me, like, this is an expectation I have, is that we disagree respectfully. And, we've really worked on that. And I can't say we're always perfect, because we're all human, but I think we really have gotten better over the past 5 years to really model that. And we want to encourage that modeling from our teachers too. Student engagement is important with legislators. And as I mentioned before, the program we talked about, those students get to meet directly with legislators from the National Conference, from the Colorado Student Leaders Institute. And we also have a younger group of students that get to meet with legislators directly, our Colorado Youth Advisory Council. And so, again, when we incorporate students into that process, I hope we do better at listening. But I think what I have to exemplify is like, let's focus on facts, history, critical thinking. You know, if you have a question, it's okay to raise the question and then talk about it respectfully. But the challenge is these are human things that I can't legislate from the state. I can't say, do this respectfully, don't do this politically. Listen to people who may be worried about something or a different way, but it's, you know, we really have to all take part in that and all model that behavior. And so, you know, it's not that piece, depolarizing is not a piece we can just legislate. We all have to be in it together, and we all have to model that together.
And perhaps, you know, what I'm thinking about now too is grace. If, you know, some days we fail, right? That, you know, as long as we say, you know, today I did not model the discourse that I'd like for, you know, you, my students to follow. So I love that, you know, definitely starts with the individual. You, Sarah, you know, I want to know how you and your peers deal with sort of these really tough conversations and, you know, having civil discourse with perhaps people or, you know, leaders or, you know, your own peers that you disagree with. And, you know, how or where do you look to have these, you know, more meaningful conversations instead of just canceling or having a screaming match or, you know, this more unproductive version? But like, where do you look to and how do you work on those leadership skills?
I'm glad you brought up canceling. I think with my generation, canceling is the big thing. You mess up and you're like, you're done for. Like, you have one chance and you mess up, you're out. And I've noticed with my peers, of course, they're always, you know, there's always going to be talking over each other and, you know, just fighting. What I have learned is to be patient and also just be open. And I think that takes a long time to learn. But I feel like when you start younger, that's even better because when you teach young people how to be open to new ideas, to new experiences, um, the more likely they are to listen. I know I started seventh grade, I'd say, where I started challenging my own belief systems and challenging my own views and listening to things that would make me uncomfortable. Um, and me and my friends were also really different people, and our discussions, like some of us are pro-life, some of us are pro-choice, and some of us feel really strongly about our positions, and sometimes, again, agreeing to disagree is a big part of my friendships and with my peers for the most part, and realizing that this opinion or this stance that you have doesn't have to impact the relationship you have with that person. I know sometimes it does. Sometimes someone's systems and beliefs like are too much or something you just dislike and something you have to handle it. But in general, I think it's just something we have to start at a young age and just be open and being okay to like be uncomfortable. And that's the hard part, is being uncomfortable that everything you've ever been taught is probably wrong. But yeah, that's where I'd say like be okay with
Being uncomfortable is where we learn the most, right? You never forget that moment of discomfort. So I'm so glad that you know, you wrestle with that because you know, it wouldn't be called a struggle if it was easy, right? It's a challenge. So thanks for sharing that. And you mentioned that it's easier if you start younger. So Kathy, I don't know if you can share with us, like, are we seeing a lot of our students coming in with these strong opinions, maybe not backed by fact or wanting to, you know, duke it out? Or do you think that, you know, your kids are more open and more agile than us adults who are kind of set in our ways and have to really focus to ensure that we have civil discourse?
Well, my students are kindergarten to fifth grade, so they're pretty young, don't really have many strong political, you know, views yet. They, from time to time, I can tell they're repeating things they hear at home, and that's totally fine. If it's something that comes across as attacking or disrespectful in a very nonpartisan way, I can guide them back to our character program and remind them, oh, we want to make sure we're respectful, we show compassion. And that's something it's beyond empathy. You know, empathy is understanding, you know, looking at someone else's situation through their lens, but compassion is that willingness to help them. Yeah. So it's being understanding and being compassionate and just, I don't know. I guess my students really don't express those types of things. Like that's going to be divisive. They're more like, so-and-so pushed me down and I didn't like it. Okay, so did you talk to them? Let them know first that they hurt you in some way. And then let me know if you need me to help you solve your problem. When you guys, some of you were referencing like communications and being respectful. And I use a couple of social or like educational programs like Google Classroom and another one called Seesaw. And these are digital spaces for kids to share work, as well as comment and give feedback on each other's work. And I make sure that I put structures in place the very first time we do this, so that when we engage in this online environment, that they are being respectful, knowing that it could very quickly spiral out of control if they don't have a structure. And so a couple of things I ask my students to do is to think and to tag. And when it comes to think, they stop and think before they share something online, and they think, is it true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind? That's the acronym for think. And if they come up with no for any one of those questions, maybe make a different choice. And I don't tell them that that's a wrong choice, so they need to make a better choice. Just make a different choice and allow them to discern what is good and what's bad. And again, I'm here to help kind of facilitate those decisions as they need. When they then see someone else's work and they want to give feedback, they can use the TAG acronym. And TAG is tell them specifically something you like. Don't just say it's cool. Give them some real feedback and let them know what you love about that project. I really like how you did, and then fill in the blank. The A is ask a question. So instead of saying that, I don't know why you did this, ask a question that gives them something to do that might give them a different perspective, or give them something to kind of think about, like, oh, I didn't think about that. And then the G is to give a suggestion, but start with the statement, I wonder. So instead of saying, hey, you need to do this, say, I wonder. So now it's not coming across attacking. It's more about, I'm giving a suggestion because I care about you and I want to help you do really great at this project you're sharing. And we talk about, why would we make a comment online? Is it because you want to feel good about yourself? Do you want to get more likes? Or are you really trying to help them out? And what do you think is the better choice? And so in a very safe environment in my classroom, before they become of age and can use social media, I try to give them some structures to help them be able to engage in respectful online discourse. And again, that runs parallel to what they would do in person. And all of that ties back to our character education program. So again, I don't have like maybe those really divisive comments, but even on the most basic level, I try to give them those structures so that they can engage in a way that is respectful and is productive and is not attacking and tearing someone down. Earlier, we were talking about, having that exposure to having multiple perspectives, and one in our curriculum. And one of my colleagues put it beautifully when she said, our students, when they look at a curriculum, they need to see mirrors and windows. The mirrors so that the student can see themselves in the curriculum and see that curriculum reflected back, to make it personal for them and realize that they are a part of that curriculum. But then also to see windows, to have a window of opportunity to find a way to civically engage with that content or that curriculum. So again, I try to give them ways, even in the early ages here, that they can use as a foundation so that when they move into those other more mature environments or more challenging discussions, they have a little bit of structure to kind of guide them so that, again, they don't turn into attacking and it's productive and respectful.
I love the metacognition. I would venture to say that many adults don't know why they comment after reading an article. They don't know the actual why of it. So for us to go through those exercises and perhaps embed and, think twice before we say things that are not reflective of our true character and are hurtful, things that we might regret, but they are on the permanent record, thanks to the way that our digital world works. So thanks for sharing that.
And Jenna, can I add something to that?
Please.
I think I just want us to think in the future of a student that's gone through Kathy's classes versus a student who has not, and the difference that we have that between those two students when they become adults. So I think that often when we say, if a student has gone through 7th or 8th grade and they can't read effectively, we say, what has the school done in order to make sure that the student hasn't developed literacy or mathematical foundation skills, whatever it is? I think to some extent, of course, it's not all, nothing is all, should be on all educators and schools. As a parent right now, my 6-year-old just stormed in here and I know I'm going to have to go talk to her. Yes. But I think that we need to say, like, if this is the state of our political discourse, if this is the state where we're talking about media literacy and being able to distinguish between fact and fiction, what are our schools doing? What are we charging them with? How are we preparing and supporting our educators to be able to do that work effectively well? And that's actually why I really love Commissioner Anthes's earlier point, that this isn't the work of just a social studies teacher. This is something that should be built across our educational experiences, but it's also not natural. These are teachable skills, and we need to develop those teachable skills. And that happens when we assess them, when we provide professional training for our educators, when we develop and fund out-of-school programming that facilitates these developments of skills. So it's not an accident that students in Kathy's classes will come out with those experiences. It's an intention. And it's an intention that we need to build across our education system.
Well, this is a perfect segue into Commissioner Anthes. You've actually focused a lot on school leader and educator effectiveness, and you continue to reiterate that providing support to teachers actually results in student outcomes. And absolutely, if we're not teaching these civic skills at an early age, we're not going to see them. So there's just so much that teachers are responsible for, and just would love for you to take a moment to just reflect on, what your state's doing to prepare pre-service teachers and, current teachers with content knowledge and with skills and these promising, pedagogical practices that, Kathy's talking about. And of course, what could be happening in middle schools and high schools and beyond.
Yeah, it really is a challenge to, if you look across any legislative session, I feel like, at least in Colorado, I feel like we keep adding more to teachers' plates.
Right.
You have
Not
to do
removing
this.
a thing.
Yeah, you have to do this, and you have to do this. And that's why I really keep trying to emphasize this interdisciplinary approach. So it's not like one separate thing that you do at the end of the day, and it's woven throughout. So we really, we do approve our educator preparation programs from the content level at the state. And so we do, but even the number of our standards, we have 13 different subject areas that we have standards for. So we do go in and we try to work with our prep programs to really think about how we can prepare our teachers to do this interdisciplinary approach, not just with civics, but with lots of content. And I think that has shown that students are much more engaged when we do interdisciplinary approaches because, just like you, Sarah, said, she's a scientist, but she's creative and she wants to be involved as a civic leader. And you can do all three of those things, and you can teach and get depth of content through all of those things. And so that's really one thing we strive to work with our educator preparation programs in, as we help them teach our standards. And that is really one strategy we have, because we get the criticism, like, you have 13 different content areas, if we have to teach them all, and then we have these professional development requirements on, literacy and mental health, and, we just put in new requirements on being able to monitor for seizures, and it's amazing the things we ask teachers to do. So how do we package this in a very interdisciplinary way, because that's how we live our lives. We live our lives, not in silos, but holistically.
Unfortunately, we could talk about this forever, but we are coming to a close here. So I do want to share a few audience questions, and I'll have everyone go around and maybe sort of decide what angle they want to take. But we had a few come in. One person asked the billion-dollar question, how can civics be taught in a nonpartisan manner? Though I do feel like many of you have addressed that. Another individual asked, is media literacy or news literacy part of civic literacy, and how it can be incorporated in the classroom? And then another participant has asked what the greatest impediment to teaching civics in our public schools are. So those are sort of the things that audience members are thinking. And I'll also throw in finally just, how do we elevate the role of civics in the schools once again? So any closing thoughts? We'll start with our youngest, you, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind.
I'd like to, if we go more to the, I'm myself, or sorry, my words are jumbled today. I myself come from a public school, so I'd like to learn more about what you guys have to say about the impediments of civics education.
Wonderful. Kathy?
Sure. I just want to go back to this one. There's no easy silver bullet for, in terms of like, how do we teach civics in a nonpartisan way? I mean, it's like this has actually been a question we've talked about for, years and years and years and years. I think it's coming more to the forefront because of our divided nature. But I am always a believer in call it out. Like be honest. Say, what do you see in this world? Is that how you want to debate? Like, what are the pros and cons, hopefully mostly pros, of hearing a different perspective? How can you pivot from that different perspective and share your perspective responsibly? I just, there's no way some of this we can create a policy for that everybody adheres to. I do think it is becoming more and more real that a focus on civic education is important. I would be careful. What I say to people is be careful to not get caught in the moment of the day. Like, we have like controversy on social emotional education. Well, what does that really mean? Let's break that down. We have controversy on critical race theory. Well, what does that really mean? Let's break it down. And use those as teaching moments to say other people feel differently about this. Why? And try to uncover that. But it's just going to take every one of us because this is something we can't legislate.
Yeah, it's important to stay focused on the North Star. Ace, would you mind sharing some closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think that part of the how you do the controversial topics is you, one, focus on the skills. There are specific civic skills, and and the topics in some ways are going to very much change by the time the students are our age and voting. So really focus on the skills, I think, is one big area. I think I agree with the commissioner also in terms of clarifying terms, because otherwise we just imbue whatever meaning we are told either on the social media, like at the tweet or whatever it is, on what these terms are. And I think that honestly, as charged as critical race theory, just as an example, is right now, if you ask 10 different people what critical race theory is, you're going to get 10 different answers. So be very clear about the terminology. And then lastly, I think that I think about this in the sense that I have a first grader right now. Over the next 12 years, it is undoubtable that I'm going to have political differences with some of her teachers. That's just, any parent should expect that in some way in those 12 years. But I think that the question is, how do we prepare our teachers and support our teachers to help our students engage in meaningful inquiry? So I don't want my child to be indoctrinated with a conservative or a progressive or whatever ideology. I want them to be empowered with the right questions and develop those kinds of skills to be able to engage in those questions in a manner of civil disagreement and civic friendship. And so I think if we're leading with inquiry, and this is one of the things I think that's the hallmarks of the EAD roadmap, I think that that's an area that we can be actually more effective and also get away from this political food fights that we're engaged in.
Wonderful. And Kathleen, last but not least.
Yeah, I would agree with what the panelists are saying here. One other thing I may encourage educators to do is find opportunities to get involved, just as we encourage our students to start a club and, around an issue or a topic that they care about. As teachers, I know we have a lot on our plate. I'm one of them. I understand that, but find ways that if there's something that is concerning for the curriculum you have in front of you, be vocal about it. I'm hoping that you feel that you're in a school that you can approach your administrators, you can approach the school board, you can go to city council and get involved. I had an opportunity early in my career to meet with my state representatives to advocate for additional funding in ed tech. And it was a really powerful moment for me and my 2 fourth grade students that I had in tow. And so I learned early on in my career that I do have a voice as an educator, but I also have a responsibility to my students to use it. And so I just encourage teachers that when they feel that, they don't have that safety net, or if they feel that they don't have what they need, to be vocal about it, express those needs, and look for others who can try to help you. We are all out there. We all have, safety nets and, lifelines we're happy to throw to each other. So just look for those that are able to help you so that you aren't going it alone. It's choppy waters. It's a rough world out there. So as educators, we need to identify ways that we can prepare our students to, like I said, it's 100% their future. So help them get ready for it.
Well, I feel that the state of Colorado is in good hands, and I just want to extend my deepest gratitude and thanks to our esteemed panelists for joining us today. We so appreciate the contributions you've made just to this conversation, but to civic education in general. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.